The grand marble court of Udiga was alive with celebration. The Rothor dynasty had repelled an invading force, and the Maharaja was holding a royal council to honor the victory. Veer, dressed in the ceremonial white and gold of the Rothor princes, sat at the edge of the long table, listening intently as generals recounted the battle. Unlike his brothers, Veer had little interest in warfare but had a mind sharp enough to contribute to the kingdom's success. That evening, he presented a proposal to secure an alliance with the neighboring kingdom of Marwar through trade rather than war. The pen can sometimes achieve what the sword cannot, Veer said, his voice steady but calm. His eldest brother, Devraj, scoffed loudly. A weak man hides behind words, Veer. The Rothor dynasty was built on steel, not diplomacy. Before Veer could respond, the Maharaja raised a hand, silencing the room. Devraj, enough, Pratap Rothor said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Veer's proposal has merit. We cannot fight on all fronts. Devraj's jaw tightened, and a shadow flickered in his eyes, a hint of his growing resentment toward his younger brother. The meeting ended with Veer being tasked with overseeing negotiations with Marwar. It was a victory for him, but it painted a target on his back. That night, Veer sat in his chambers, surrounded by maps and letters. His closest companion, Roghav, entered with a worried expression. Something feels wrong, my prince, Roghav said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Your brother, he doesn't take kindly to being overshadowed. Veer laughed softly. Devraj has always been jealous, but he would never harm his own blood. Before Roghav could reply, a knock came at the door. A servant entered, trembling as he held out a sealed letter. Urgent, my lord, he whispered. Veer opened the letter and froze. It was an order, signed by him, authorizing the sale of Rothor military secrets to a rival kingdom. His heart raced as he scanned the forged document, realizing the implications. Before he could act, guards stormed into the room, led by none other than Devraj. Seize him. Devraj commanded. Brother, what is this madness? Veer demanded, standing his ground. Devraj held up the letter with a triumphant smirk. Treason, Veer. Selling secrets to our enemies? Have you no shame? Veer's eyes widened in shock. This is a lie? You know I would never. But the guards grabbed him, pulling him away from his desk. Roghav drew his sword, ready to fight, but Veer shook his head. No bloodshed tonight, he said softly. They dragged him to the throne room, where the Maharaja sat, flanked by his advisors. Queen Rajmata stood behind him, her face pale and unreadable. Devraj laid the letter before the court. Here is the proof of Veer's treason, he declared, his voice filled with righteous fury. He has betrayed the Rothor dynasty. Veer stepped forward, his voice shaking but resolute. Father, you know me. You know I would never do this. This letter is a forgery. The Maharaja's eyes were filled with conflict as he looked between his sons. Before he could speak, another advisor produced a chest filled with gold coins, supposedly found in Veer's chambers. It was all too perfect, too orchestrated. Veer turned to his mother, silently pleading for her to speak, but she remained still, her lips pressed tightly together. Devraj, you accuse your brother of treason. What do you propose as punishment? The Maharaja asked, his voice heavy with sorrow. Exile, Devraj said without hesitation. Let him wander the deserts he has betrayed. Let him die with the weight of his crimes. Veer's heart broke as his father, after a long, agonizing silence, nodded. So be it. The heat was suffocating. The golden sands of the Thar desert stretched endlessly before Veer, each step sinking him deeper into exhaustion. The royal guards had escorted him to the edge of the desert and left him with nothing but a waterskin and the clothes on his back. The sun was merciless, beating down on him as if the gods themselves condemned him. His throat burned with thirst, and his feet bled from the sharp rocks hidden beneath the sand. As the first night fell, the desert's cold replaced its heat. Veer shivered, his mind replaying the events of the trial. His father's disappointment, Devraj's smug satisfaction, and his mother's silence, all of it cut deeper than any blade. Why didn't you speak, mother? He whispered into the darkness. Why didn't you fight for me? By the third day, Veer was hallucinating. He saw visions of his younger self running through the palace gardens, his mother's laughter echoing around him. He saw Devroj teaching him how to hold a sword for the first time. The memories turned dark, morphing into shadows of betrayal. Devroj's face twisted into a cruel smile. His father turned away, leaving him to rot. Just as he collapsed, too weak to stand, a shadow fell over him. A figure in saffron robes, their face obscured by the desert wind, knelt beside him. "Rise, child of the ashes," the figure said, their voice resonant with an otherworldly power. "Your journey has only begun." Veer blacked out, the figure's words echoing in his mind. Veer woke to the sound of chanting and the scent of sandalwood and jasmine. His body ached, and his lips were cracked, but he was alive. Opening his eyes, he found himself inside a dimly lit cave. The walls were adorned with ancient carvings of gods and mythical beasts, their stories swirling together in intricate patterns. A fire crackled at the center, casting flickering shadows that danced like spirits. The saffron-robed figure sat cross-legged by the fire, their face partially hidden by a hood. They were grinding herbs into a paste, their movements deliberate and calm. "You are awake," the figure said without looking up. Their voice was neither harsh nor kind, it simply was, as if spoken by the wind itself. Veer tried to sit up but winced as pain shot through his ribs. Where am I?" "In the land of second chances," the figure replied, setting down the mortar and pestle. They turned to Veer, revealing a weathered face with piercing grey eyes. "The desert spared you, but barely. What is your name, child?" "Veer," he whispered, his throat dry. The figure handed him a clay bowl filled with water. "Drink, Veer. Your body is weak, but your spirit is stubborn." Veer drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. He looked up at the stranger, his mind racing with questions. "Who are you? Why did you save me?" The figure smiled faintly. "I am Kavi, a keeper of truths and a seeker of balance. As for why I saved you, the desert led me to you. It is not often that it gifts me the living." Veer frowned, his memories flooding back. "I was exiled, betrayed by my own blood. I have nothing left." "Ah, but you have much," Kavi said, their voice sharp. "You have anger, pain, and a thirst for justice. These are not nothing, they are the seeds of transformation." Over the next few days, Kavi tended to Veer's wounds and introduced him to the rituals of survival. Veer learned to find water hidden beneath the sand, to navigate by the stars, and to use the desert winds to his advantage. "You think your exile is the end, but it is only the beginning," Kavi said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Tell me, what do you desire most?" "To return home," Veer said without hesitation. "To expose my brother for the snake he is. To reclaim what is mine." Kavi studied him, their eyes narrowing. "Revenge is a fire, Veer. It can burn your enemies, but it can also consume you. What will you do when there is nothing left to destroy?" Veer hesitated, unsure of the answer. Kavi smiled knowingly. "You will learn, in time," they said. Kavi began Veer's training with grueling tasks. At dawn, Veer ran through the dunes carrying sacks of sand on his back. At noon, he meditated under the blazing sun, learning to quiet his mind despite the heat. At dusk, he sparred with Kavi, their wooden swords clashing against the backdrop of a blood-red sky. "You fight like a prince," Kavi said after one session, knocking Veer flat on his back. "Precise, but predictable. If you wish to defeat your brother, you must think like a wolf, not a lamb." Veer grit his teeth, refusing to rise until he could find an opening. He swept Kavi's legs with a sudden strike, catching the sage off guard. "Better," Kavi said, offering Veer a hand. "But you are still too soft. Steel your heart, or it will shatter." One day, Kavi led Veer deep into the desert to a place where the air shimmered with heat and strange illusions danced on the horizon. "This is the Mirage Field," Kavi said. "Here, the mind plays tricks. It will show you your greatest fears and deepest desires. If you wish to become stronger, you must face what lies within." Veer hesitated, but the determination in his heart pushed him forward. As he stepped into the shimmering heat, the world around him warped. He was back in the palace, standing before his father. The Maharaja's eyes were filled with disappointment. "You betrayed us, Veer," his father said, his voice like a knife. "You are no son of mine." Veer turned to see Devraj, laughing as he ascended the throne. "You were always too weak, little brother. Did you really think you could outshine me?" Then the scene shifted. Veer saw himself in chains, dragged through the streets of Udiga as the people jeered and threw stones. "Enough!" Veer shouted, his voice cracking. "This is not real." The illusions faded, leaving him standing in the empty desert. Kavi appeared beside him, a proud smile on their face. "You are stronger than I thought," Kavi said. "But strength alone will not win this war. Come, there is more to learn." Veer returned to Kavi's hermitage with a newfound determination. The illusions of the mirage field had stirred something within him, something dark, raw, and unrelenting. His hatred for Devraj burned hotter than the desert sun, but alongside it was a strange clarity, a voice whispering, "You are more than what they made you." Kavi observed Veer's transformation in silence. For days, they pushed him harder, their methods brutal but purposeful. The flame within. "Strike!" Kavi shouted, hurling a wooden spear toward Veer. Veer dodged and countered with his sword, the wooden blade cutting through the air with precision. Kavi deflected it easily, their movements fluid, almost mocking. "You hesitate," Kavi said, stepping back. "You still fight as though you have something to lose. In war, hesitation is death." Veer tightened his grip on the sword. "I'm not afraid of death." Kavi tilted their head. "Then why do you hold back? Show me the fire inside you." Something inside Veer snapped. He lunged at Kavi with ferocity, his strikes fast and relentless. For the first time, Kavi was forced to defend seriously. The clash of their weapons echoed through the canyon, dust rising around them like smoke. When Veer finally disarmed Kavi, the sage nodded approvingly. "Good. But remember, anger is a tool, not a master. Let it guide your blade, but do not let it control you." Veer knelt, panting, but his eyes burned with resolve. The truth about betrayal. One night, as they sat by the fire, Kavi spoke of a time long past. "Do you think you are the first prince to be betrayed by his kin?" Kavi asked, their voice low. Veer glanced at them, startled. "What do you mean?" Kavi stirred the fire, the flames dancing in their reflective eyes. "Before I was Kavi the Hermit, I was Kaviendra Singh of the Pratapar dynasty. A prince, like you. But unlike you, I was too blind to see the dagger aimed at my back." Veer leaned forward, intrigued. "What happened?" "My brother poisoned our father and framed me for the crime. The court believed him, and I was sentenced to death. I escaped, but not without losing everything." Kavi's voice grew colder. "I wandered the deserts, consumed by hatred, until I found this place. It taught me to let go of my vengeance, or so I thought." Veer frowned. "You didn't return to reclaim your throne?" Kavi shook their head. "I learned that power corrupts even the well-intentioned. But you are different, Veer. You don't seek power for its own sake. You seek justice." Their words struck a chord in Veer. For the first time, he began to question the depths of his own ambition. Was he truly seeking justice, or was he simply consumed by the need to punish those who wronged him? A week later, Kavi led Veer to a hidden chamber deep within the canyon. The walls were etched with ancient inscriptions, glowing faintly in the firelight. At the center of the chamber rested a pedestal, atop which lay a black gem that seemed to pulse with an inner light. "The Kairu," Kavi said reverently. "The soul gem. It amplifies the will of its bearer, turning thought into reality. But it comes with a price." Veer stepped closer, drawn to the gem's otherworldly glow. "What kind of price?" Kavi's expression darkened. "It feeds on the essence of its wielder. The stronger your desires, the more it takes from you. It is both a gift and a curse." Veer hesitated. "Why show this to me?" Because you will need it, Kavi said simply. Your brother's strength lies in his power over men, but your strength lies in your spirit. The Kairu will amplify that spirit, but only if you are prepared to bear the burden. Veer reached for the gem, but Kavi stopped him. Not yet. First, you must prove that you are worthy. To claim the Kairu, Veer had to undergo a final trial. Kavi led him to a cave shrouded in darkness, the air heavy with an unexplainable presence. Inside, you will face your greatest enemy, Kavi said. Not your brother. Not your family. Yourself. Veer stepped into the cave, his heart pounding. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to come alive, forming into a mirror image of himself. The shadow Veer smirked. Do you think you're a hero? A savior? You're nothing but a coward, cast out like the weakling you are. Veer clenched his fists. You're wrong. Am I? The shadow taunted, circling him. You hesitate because you fear the truth, that you are no better than Devroj. You crave power as much as he does. Veer lunged at the shadow, but his strikes passed through it like smoke. The shadow laughed. You cannot defeat me with force. I am every doubt, every fear, every dark thought you've ever had. Veer fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of the shadow's words. But then he remembered Kavi's teachings. Anger is a tool, not a master. I am not you, Veer said, his voice steady. I may have doubts, but they do not define me. I may have fears, but they will not control me. The shadow faltered, its form flickering. I will rise, Veer continued, his voice growing stronger. Not for vengeance, but for justice. For the people who suffer under my brother's rule. For the kingdom that deserves better. The shadow let out a final, piercing scream before dissolving into nothingness. When Veer emerged from the cave, Kavi was waiting. Without a word, they led him back to the chamber. This time, Veer reached for the gem without hesitation. As his fingers closed around it, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling him with both power and pain. Kavi watched as the gem's light dimmed, settling into Veer's palm. You have passed the test. But remember, Veer, the Kairu is a tool, not a crutch. Use it wisely, or it will consume you. Veer nodded, his mind already racing with plans. His transformation was complete. He was no longer the naive prince who had been betrayed. He was the phoenix, rising from the ashes. Veer stood at the mouth of the cave, the Kairu resting heavy in his palm. The gem seemed alive, pulsing faintly with his heartbeat, as though it could sense his thoughts. It whispered promises of power, justice, and revenge. But Kavi's warning echoed in his mind, use it wisely, or it will consume you. The night sky stretched above him, the stars scattered like shards of glass. Veer closed his fist around the gem, feeling its warmth spread through his veins. The world was no longer the same. He was no longer the same. I am ready, Veer said, turning to Kavi. Kavi regarded him with a mixture of pride and caution. Perhaps you are. But readiness is not the same as wisdom. Before you return to Udiga, there is one more truth you must face. Kavi led Veer deeper into the canyon, to a hidden grove where the air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. At the center of the grove stood an ancient shrine, its stones worn smooth by time. This is the shrine of the Shakti Devi, Kavi said, kneeling before the altar. The goddess of power and retribution. She watches over those who seek justice, but her favor comes at a cost. Veer followed suit, bowing his head. What cost? Kavi placed a hand on the altar, their voice heavy with emotion. The truth. Suddenly, the air around them shimmered, and the world shifted. Veer found himself standing in the palace gardens, the scent of roses and the sound of laughter filling the air. He saw his father, the Maharaja, standing under the shade of a banyan tree. Beside him was Veer's mother, a hand resting on her swollen belly. This is, Veer began, his voice trembling. Your birth, Kavi said, appearing beside him. But watch closely. A shadowy figure emerged from behind the tree, his uncle, Virendra Singh. The man whispered something to the Maharaja, who nodded solemnly. Moments later, soldiers appeared, dragging a weeping servant woman. Spare her, the woman cried, clutching her stomach. My child is innocent. The Maharaja's face was stone. You betrayed the throne. There is no mercy for traitors. Veer watched in horror as the soldiers dragged the woman away. Her screams echoed in his ears, even as the vision faded. When he turned to Kavi, his hands trembled. What does this mean? It means your bloodline is not as pure as you were led to believe, Kavi said. Your mother was not the Maharaja's first wife. She was a servant, accused of treason. But she was with child. You, and the Maharaja, fearing scandal, took her as his queen. Veer staggered back, his mind reeling. So, I am not. You are not fully royal by blood, Kavi said gently. But that does not make you less worthy. If anything, it makes your claim stronger. You are a child of both worlds, the rulers and the ruled. You can bring balance where others sow discord. Veer clenched his fists, anger bubbling to the surface. Devraj must know this. That's why he betrayed me. He feared I would take what he thought was his. Kavi placed a hand on Veer's shoulder. Perhaps. But your brother's reasons matter little now. What matters is what you do with this knowledge. Veer's journey back to Udiga was long and treacherous. Disguised as a common traveler, he passed through villages ravaged by drought and poverty. The people whispered of the kingdom's decline under Devraj's rule, of heavy taxes and unjust punishments. At one village, Veer came across a group of soldiers tormenting a farmer. The man was on his knees, pleading for mercy as the soldiers laughed and kicked him. Please, the farmer begged. I have given all I can. My children will starve if I give more. The leader of the soldiers sneered. Then let them starve. The Maharaja demands tribute, and we will take it, whether you like it or not. Veer's blood boiled. He stepped forward, his hood casting a shadow over his face. Enough, he said, his voice cold and commanding. The soldiers turned to him, startled. The leader scoffed. Who are you to give orders here? Veer didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his cloak and pulled out the Koiru. The gem flared to life, its light bathing the area in an eerie glow. The soldiers froze, their faces pale with fear. You will leave this village, Veer said, his voice resonating with an unnatural power. And you will not return. The soldiers scrambled to obey, their bravado evaporating in the presence of the gem's power. When they were gone, the farmer looked up at Veer with wide eyes. Who are you? Veer helped him to his feet, a faint smile on his lips. A friend. Nothing more. As Veer continued his journey, rumors of a mysterious savior began to spread. Villagers whispered of a hooded figure wielding a gem of great power, standing against the Maharaja's tyranny. By the time Veer reached the outskirts of Udiga, he had gathered a small following, peasants, merchants, and even soldiers who had grown disillusioned with Devraj's rule. Standing atop a hill overlooking the city, Veer felt a surge of emotion. This was his home, the place where he had been born and betrayed. But it was also a city in need of redemption. Turning to his followers, he raised the Koiru. Its light illuminated their faces, filling them with hope. Udiga has fallen into darkness, Veer said, his voice strong. But we will bring the light. Together, we will reclaim what has been stolen, from us, from our people, from our future. The time for justice is now. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing across the hills. Veer tightened his grip on the gem, his resolve unshakable. The battle for Udiga had begun. Veer stood at the gates of Udiga under the cover of darkness, the city looming before him like a slumbering beast. The whispers of rebellion had reached the ears of the palace guards, and security was tighter than ever. But Veer was no longer the naive prince who once walked these streets with innocence in his heart. He was a warrior now, sharpened by betrayal and driven by justice. His small band of followers had taken positions across the city, ready to act on his command. Among them was Rajan, a former palace guard who had once sworn loyalty to the Maharaja but had turned against Devraj after witnessing the extent of his cruelty. We'll create a diversion at the west gate, Rajan whispered, his voice low. That should draw most of the guards away from the main palace entrance. Veer nodded, his eyes fixed on the towering palace walls. Make sure no innocents are caught in the crossfire. We're here to reclaim the city, not destroy it. Rajan saluted before disappearing into the shadows. Veer adjusted the hood of his cloak, the Kairu pulsing faintly against his chest. It had become a part of him now, its power both a blessing and a burden. The plan unfolded with precision. Rajan's team set fire to a storage warehouse near the west gate, the flames lighting up the night sky. As the guards rushed to contain the blaze, Veer and a select group of fighters made their way toward a hidden entrance to the palace, an old servant's passage that Rajan had revealed to him. The passage was narrow and damp, the air thick with the smell of decay. Veer led the way, his heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. Every step brought him closer to the man who had destroyed his life. At the end of the passage, they emerged into the palace gardens. The once beautiful grounds were now overgrown and neglected, a reflection of the kingdom's decline under Devroj's rule. Stay close, Veer whispered, motioning for his team to follow. They moved through the shadows, avoiding patrols and slipping past guards with practiced ease. Veer's years in the palace gave him an advantage, he knew its layout like the back of his hand. Finally, they reached the outer halls of the royal quarters. Veer turned to his team, his voice firm. This is where we part ways. Stay here and secure the area. I'll confront Devroj alone. One of the fighters, a young woman named Mira, stepped forward. Are you sure? He'll have his most loyal guards with him. Veer smiled faintly. I'm counting on it. The royal chambers were eerily silent as Veer entered. The air was heavy, the faint scent of incense lingering in the room. At the far end, Devroj sat on a gilded throne, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. Well, Devroj said, his lips curling into a smirk. The prodigal son returns. Veer stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. I didn't come here to exchange pleasantries. Devroj chuckled, rising from his throne. And yet, here you are. Did you really think you could sneak into my palace unnoticed? I've been expecting you. At his signal, a dozen guards emerged from the shadows, their weapons drawn. Veer tensed, but didn't falter. You may have the numbers, Veer said, pulling out the Kairu, but I have the power. The gem flared to life, its light illuminating the room. The guards hesitated, fear flickering in their eyes. Devroj's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly composed himself. So, you found the Kairu, Devroj said, his voice laced with disdain. Do you even know what it is? What it does? Or are you just another fool blinded by its promises? Veer's grip tightened on the gem. I know enough. Enough to bring you to your knees. Devroj laughed, the sound cold and hollow. You think you're here to take back the throne, but you're wrong. This is about more than power, Veer. This is about legacy. Father chose you, a half-blood, over me. He insulted our lineage, and I will not let that stand. Veer's eyes burned with fury. You destroyed our family. You betrayed our people. Your thirst for power has brought nothing but ruin to this kingdom. Devroj's smile faded, replaced by a sneer. And you think you can fix it? You, who were too weak to see the dagger at your back. You're no savior, Veer. You're a relic of a failed dynasty. With a roar, Devroj lunged at Veer, his sword gleaming in the light of the gem. Veer parried the strike, their blades clashing with a deafening ring. The room erupted into chaos as the guards joined the fray. The fight between Veer and Devroj was brutal and unrelenting. Their swords danced in a deadly rhythm, sparks flying with each clash. Veer's training with Kavi gave him an edge, but Devroj fought with the ferocity of a cornered beast. You should have stayed dead. Devroj snarled, aiming a vicious strike at Veer's side. Veer dodged and countered, his blade slicing through Devroj's arm. Blood spattered the marble floor, but Devroj barely flinched. I survived because you underestimated me, Veer said, his voice steady. But that was your first and last mistake. The Kairu pulsed in Veer's hand, its energy surging through him. With a burst of strength, he disarmed Devroj, sending his sword clattering to the ground. Devroj stumbled back, his eyes wide with fear. You wouldn't dare. Veer raised his sword, the point hovering inches from Devroj's throat. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. You're right, Veer said, lowering his weapon. I won't kill you. But you will face justice, for our family, for our people. Before Devroj could respond, Veer struck him with the hilt of his sword, knocking him unconscious. As the sun rose over Udiga, Veer stood on the palace balcony, addressing the crowd that had gathered below. Word of Devroj's capture had spread, and the people had come to witness the beginning of a new chapter. My people, Veer began, his voice carrying across the square. For too long, this kingdom has suffered under the weight of greed and corruption. But today, we begin anew. Together, we will rebuild Udiga into a land of justice, prosperity, and hope. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices filled with renewed faith. As Veer looked out over his people, the Kairu pulsed faintly in his hand. He knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. The phoenix had risen, and Udiga would rise with him. The palace was alive with activity as the people of Udiga celebrated the end of Devroj's reign. Veer, now seated on the throne he had fought so hard to reclaim, watched the revelry from the balcony. Yet, his heart was heavy. Victory had come at a cost. The Kairu, though instrumental in his success, weighed on his soul, its whispers growing louder each passing day. Your Majesty, Kavi said, entering the chamber. Their voice was calm, but their eyes betrayed concern. The council awaits your decision regarding Devroj's fate. Veer nodded, rising from the throne. And the people? What do they demand? They are divided, Kavi replied. Some call for his execution, while others believe exile would suffice. There are also whispers that sparing him would show weakness. Veer clenched his fists. Weakness or strength is not decided by the mob. I must decide what is just, not what is easy. The grand hall was filled with citizens, nobles, and council members as Devroj was brought forth in chains. His once proud demeanor was gone, replaced by a hollow bitterness. Veer stood, his voice echoing through the chamber. Devroj Singh, you stand accused of treason, murder, and the destruction of Udiga's prosperity. Do you deny these charges? Devroj raised his head, his eyes burning with defiance. I deny nothing. I did what I had to do to secure this kingdom's future. A murmur spread through the crowd, but Veer silenced it with a raised hand. Your actions were not for the kingdom but for yourself. You betrayed your family, your people, and the legacy of our ancestors. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Devroj smirked. Only this, you will regret sparing me. Mercy is the weakness of fools, and it will be your undoing. Veer's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. You are mistaken. Mercy is not weakness, it is a choice. But you will not be free to exploit it. He turned to the council. Devroj will not be executed. Instead, he will be exiled to the farthest reaches of the kingdom, where he will live out his days in solitude. He will be watched, and any attempt to return will be met with death. The hall erupted into a mix of cheers and protests, but Veer stood firm. His decision had been made. Weeks passed, and Veer found himself buried in the affairs of the kingdom. Rebuilding Udiga was no easy task. Corruption had seeped into every corner, and the people's trust in their rulers was fragile. One evening, as Veer walked through the palace gardens, Kavi approached him. You've been working tirelessly, they said. But even kings need rest. Veer sighed, rubbing his temples. Rest feels like a luxury I cannot afford. Every day brings new problems, famine, unrest, rebuilding alliances. And then there's the Kairu. It grows stronger, more demanding. I fear what it might do if I lose control. Kavi placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. The gem is powerful, but it does not define you. Remember why you fight, your people, your home. As long as you hold on to that, you will not falter. Veer smiled faintly. Thank you, Kavi. Your counsel has been a light in these dark times. Just as Veer began to feel a semblance of stability, news arrived that sent a chill down his spine. A messenger stumbled into the throne room, his clothes torn and his face pale. "Your Majesty," he gasped, falling to his knees. "Bandits, an army of them, they've taken the eastern provinces. They call themselves the Shadowborn." The room fell silent as the messenger continued. "They are led by a man called Kale. He claims to be the true ruler of Udiga and vows to destroy anyone who opposes him." Veer's grip tightened on the arms of his throne. "Kale," he said, his voice low. "What do we know of him?" The council members exchanged uneasy glances before one of them spoke. "He appeared shortly after your return to the throne. Some say he's a warlord from the northern deserts, others believe he's a demon in human form. What is certain is that his forces grow stronger by the day." Veer rose to his feet, the Kairu glowing faintly at his chest. "Then we will meet this Kale and show him the strength of Udiga. Prepare the army. We march at dawn." The plains of the eastern provinces stretched out before Veer and his army, the horizon darkened by the smoke of burning villages. The Shadowborn had left a trail of destruction in their wake, and the people of the region had fled to the forests for safety. As Veer approached the enemy camp, he saw Kale for the first time, a towering figure clad in black armor, his face hidden behind a mask. The air around him seemed to shimmer with an unnatural energy. "You must be the usurper," Kale called out, his voice deep and mocking. "The so-called king who hides behind his gem of tricks." Veer stepped forward, his sword drawn. "I am the rightful ruler of Udiga, and I will not let you terrorize my people." Kale laughed, the sound echoing across the battlefield. "Rightful ruler? Your claim is as weak as your resolve. But no matter, I will take your kingdom, your throne, and your life." The battle that followed was fierce and unrelenting. Veer fought with the skill of a warrior and the power of the Kairu, but Kale was unlike any foe he had faced. His strength was monstrous, his movements swift and precise. As their swords clashed, Veer felt the gem surge with energy, its whispers growing louder. "Unleash me," it seemed to say. "Only I can defeat him." "No," Veer muttered, gritting his teeth. "I will not lose myself." Kale sneered, sensing his hesitation. "You're holding back, boy. That will be your downfall." With a roar, Kale struck Veer's sword, sending him stumbling back. The king fell to one knee, blood trickling from a wound on his shoulder. As Kale raised his weapon for the final blow, Veer closed his eyes and focused on the faces of his people, those he had sworn to protect. Summoning every ounce of strength, he drove his blade into Kale's chest, the Kairu blazing with light. Kale let out a guttural cry as the energy consumed him, his body crumbling to ash. The battlefield fell silent, the Shadowborn scattering in fear. Veer stood amid the ruins of the battlefield, his army rallying around him. Though victorious, he felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a deep sense of foreboding. Kavi approached, their expression grim. "You've won, but at what cost?" Veer looked at the Kairu, its light dimming but its presence still heavy. "The cost is mine to bear. As long as I hold this gem, the battle will never truly end." Kavi placed a hand on his shoulder. "Perhaps. But as long as you hold onto your humanity, there is hope." As the sun set over Udiga, Veer vowed to protect his kingdom, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. The path of a king was never easy, but with his people by his side, he would face whatever darkness awaited. Veer stood on the balcony, gazing over Udiga. The streets below were bustling with celebration, candles lighting the darkened city, fireworks illuminating the sky, but in his heart, Veer felt no triumph. He had won back the throne, but the cost was heavy. Devroj's reign had left a scar on the kingdom, and the Kairu around his neck now felt heavier than ever. "Your Majesty," Kavi's voice interrupted his thoughts. The figure appeared from the shadows, stepping into the moonlight. "The council awaits your decision regarding Devroj's fate." Veer turned, his eyes momentarily narrowing. "And the people? What do they demand?" he asked, his voice cool but strained. "They are divided," Kavi replied, their face a mask of calm. "Some call for his death, others for exile. There are also whispers that sparing him would show weakness. Veer sighed, pacing before the stone railing. Mercy or wrath, it makes no difference. I must do what is just, not what is easy. He paused, eyes glinting with resolve. We will exile him. The decision was met with mixed reactions in the council. Many were eager for Devroj's blood, but Veer's mind was made. He would not be swayed by the cries of vengeance, no matter how justified they seemed. Instead, Devroj would live in exile, forced to witness the prosperity of the kingdom he once tried to destroy from afar. Days later, Devroj was brought before the council in chains. His once royal garb had been torn to rags, his pride a shadow of what it had been. His eyes, however, still gleamed with a dangerous, defiant light. Veer sat at the head of the council, his back straight as he met his brother's gaze. Devroj Singh, Veer began, his voice carrying across the hall. You stand accused of treason, of murder, of betrayal. Do you deny these charges? Devroj's lips curled into a bitter smile. I deny nothing. I did what I had to do to secure the kingdom's future. My actions were for the greater good. A murmur rippled through the room. How could he justify his betrayal like that? The members of the council exchanged uneasy glances, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Veer's jaw clenched. Your actions were not for the good of the kingdom, but for your own ambition. You betrayed not just your family, but the very people you swore to protect. Devroj's smile deepened. Then perhaps it is your weakness, Veer, that will be your undoing. His voice was full of venom, yet there was something more in his tone, something that made Veer pause. It was the sound of a man who had nothing left to lose. Veer stood, his eyes narrowing as he addressed the council. Devroj will not be executed, but he will be exiled to the farthest reaches of the kingdom, where he will live in solitude. Any attempt to return will result in death. The room erupted in a mix of applause and protest. Some of the council members were shocked at the mercy, while others were unsure whether this leniency was a strength or a fatal flaw. Veer's decision, however, was firm, and as the sentence was passed, Devroj's eyes burned with fury. Weeks passed, and the weight of ruling Udiga began to take its toll on Veer. He spent countless hours meeting with ambassadors, settling disputes between rival factions, and rebuilding the broken parts of the kingdom. But his mind was never at ease. The Kairua's whispers grew louder each day, its influence creeping deeper into his thoughts. Late one evening, after yet another exhausting council meeting, Veer found himself walking alone through the palace gardens, lost in thought. The stars above seemed distant, as if the universe itself were indifferent to his struggle. Your Majesty, Kavi's voice broke through the stillness. They stepped into his path, concern etched into their expression. You've been working non-stop. Perhaps you should rest. Veer shook his head, his eyes hollow. I can't. I'm needed. Udiga is rebuilding, but I feel like I'm losing control over everything. The Kairu, it's getting harder to resist. Its power, it calls to me. Kavi stepped closer, their hand resting gently on his shoulder. The gem is a powerful thing, yes. But it does not define you, Veer. What matters is the king you choose to be. You've already chosen the path of mercy. Let that be your strength. Veer's gaze flickered toward the Kairu, hanging heavy on his chest. The whispering had stopped, but the unease lingered. He wanted to trust Kavi's words, but doubts continued to gnaw at him. Was he truly strong enough to resist the gem's pull? Days later, news came of a growing threat to Udiga, a force that had appeared seemingly overnight, ravaging the eastern provinces. The invaders, known as the Shadowborn, were led by a ruthless warlord named Kale, a man whose name seemed to carry with it a legacy of fear. He and his followers had been responsible for the destruction of entire villages, and their reign of terror was spreading fast. The Shadowborn are already laying siege to the eastern cities, one of the scouts reported, breathless. They call Kale the true ruler of Udiga and vow to wipe out any who oppose him. Veer's heart sank. Another threat, another battle he could not avoid. Prepare the army, he ordered, his voice cold. We march at dawn. As the army gathered and Veer made his way toward the battlefield, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just an external threat. Kale seemed to know something about him, about the Kairu, something that made Veer nervous. Veer's army arrived at the eastern plains to find utter devastation. Entire villages had been burned to the ground. The once bustling streets were eerily silent, the only sounds the distant cries of the surviving villagers. As they marched forward, they saw the Shadowborn's black banners fluttering in the wind. Kale's army was waiting. At the front of the enemy rank stood Kale himself, a massive figure clad in dark, ornate armor. His eyes gleamed with an unnatural intensity as he surveyed the approaching forces. "So, the usurper arrives," Kale's voice boomed, mocking Veer. "I've heard much about you, Veer Singh. The one who calls himself the true king." Veer's eyes locked onto Kale's, and a shiver ran down his spine. There was something in Kale's gaze, a recognition, as if the warlord knew exactly who Veer was, what he carried. "You are no king," Kale spat. "The Kairu does not belong to you. It belongs to those who know how to wield it properly." Veer clenched his fists. The gem pulsed at his chest, urging him to unleash its power. But Veer knew better. To do so would mean losing himself to it. "You'll have to kill me first, Kale," Veer said, drawing his sword. "Because Udiga will not fall to the likes of you." With a roar, the battle erupted. The Shadowborn charged, and Veer's army met them head-on. The air was thick with the clash of steel, the cries of soldiers, and the stench of blood. Veer fought with everything he had, his sword flashing through the air, his mind focused on nothing but the battle before him. But Kale was a force unlike any Veer had faced. The warlord's strikes were like lightning, cutting through Veer's forces with terrifying precision. And through it all, the whispers of the Kairu grew louder, more insistent. The clash between Veer's army and Kale's Shadowborn raged on through the day. The air was thick with smoke, the ground soaked in blood. Each swing of Veer's blade felt like a prayer for survival, but he was growing weary. Kale's forces were relentless, and their leader's presence seemed to weigh down the battlefield with an unnatural dread. Veer's chest tightened as the gem at his neck pulsed once more. He knew that his strength was fading, his will, too. His mind was clouded, and the whispers from the gem were now loud enough to drown out the sounds of the battlefield. It promised him power, victory, and the ability to end this war once and for all. "Take it," the gem coaxed, its voice a soft hiss in his ear. "You know you want to." Veer staggered, his sword almost slipping from his grip as a wave of dizziness washed over him. He stumbled back, his knees buckling for a moment as he tried to steady himself. Just then, Kavi appeared, cutting through the chaos, their eyes filled with concern. "Veer?" Kavi called, rushing to his side. "Don't listen to it. You're stronger than this." Kavi's words brought Veer back to reality, even as the Kairu continued to beckon. Veer shook his head, forcing the whispers to recede. "I will not fall to this power. Not now. Not ever." But the battle wasn't over. With Kale pushing forward, his army relentless, Veer knew he could not afford to falter. He looked at Kavi, determination burning in his eyes. "I need you by my side. We'll win this together." Kavi nodded, drawing their own blade with a quiet resolve. Together, they rushed back into the fray, cutting through the Shadowborn like a whirlwind. Each movement, each strike, brought Veer back to the present. The power of the Kairu was strong, but it was not the only power at his disposal. His true strength came from his people, and from those he trusted. By sunset, the tide of battle had turned. Kale's forces were pushed back, though the warlord himself had yet to be defeated. Veer, blooded but unbowed, stood atop a small rise overlooking the battlefield. His heart pounded in his chest, the Kairu still pulsing angrily against his skin. He could feel Kale's presence approaching, like a storm on the horizon. Then, Kale appeared. The warlord was a towering figure, clad in dark armor that seemed to absorb the light around him. His eyes gleamed with a dangerous intensity as he approached Veer, walking through the battlefield as if it were his domain. "So, you think you've won?" Kale sneered, his voice dark and commanding. "I haven't won anything," Veer replied, his sword raised, ready for the final confrontation. "This is just the beginning." Kale chuckled darkly, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. You don't understand, do you? You can't resist it forever. The Kairu was made for me, not you. You're a fool if you think you can control it. Veer's grip tightened around his sword, his heart racing. I don't need the Kairu to defeat you. You don't know the truth, Kale pressed, his smile cruel. You were never meant to be king. I was. I've been waiting for this moment, Veer. Waiting for the moment when the gem would choose the right ruler. Veer shook his head, ignoring the pang of doubt that threatened to rise within him. I'm not you, he said through gritted teeth. I won't give in to your twisted desires. With a roar, Kale charged. The two met in a clash of steel, their swords ringing out in the stillness of the evening air. Each blow struck with the force of a storm, but Veer was faster, more agile. The power of the Kairu coursed through him, but Veer kept his emotions in check, not allowing it to consume him. Kale, however, was different. His movements were ruthless, precise, as though he had long since given up any semblance of humanity. His rage was a storm, and with each blow, Veer felt the weight of the battle become more intense. You will never defeat me, Kale growled, slashing at Veer with vicious speed. But Veer's resolve was stronger. With a final, powerful strike, Veer disarmed Kale, sending his sword flying across the field. Kale fell to his knees, defeated, but not broken. Veer stood over him, breathing heavily, sword raised. It's over, he said, his voice cold. Kale looked up, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Is it? You've won the battle, but the war is far from over. The Kairu will never belong to you. It belongs to those who understand its power. With those final words, Kale's body crumpled, lifeless, as Veer stood over him, his sword still raised. The shadowborn were no more, their leader vanquished. But Veer could feel the weight of the battle settle over him like a dark cloud. The morning after Kale's death, the battlefield was eerily quiet. The bodies of the fallen were being collected, both from Veer's side and the shadowborn. The cries of the wounded echoed across the plains as medics worked tirelessly to tend to them. Veer sat alone in his tent, the silence around him suffocating. Kavi entered, their face somber but resolute. The victory is ours, Your Majesty, they said softly. But the cost, it's been great. Veer nodded, his thoughts distant. He still felt the lingering presence of the Kairu, as if it was waiting for him to finally embrace it fully. The temptation was constant, like a whisper in the back of his mind. I can't shake the feeling that this is only the beginning, Veer admitted, his voice low. Kale was right about one thing, there's more to the Kairu than I can understand. Kavi knelt beside him, their hand resting on his shoulder. You've already proved your strength, Veer. The power of the Kairu is only one part of you. You have the heart and mind of a true ruler. Trust in that. Veer looked up at them, his eyes filled with uncertainty. But what if I fail? What if I become like Kale? You won't, Kavi reassured him, their voice full of conviction. You have something he never had, love, loyalty, and a kingdom that believes in you. You're not alone in this fight. Weeks passed as Veer worked to rebuild the eastern provinces, his people slowly recovering from the devastation caused by Kale's war. The kingdom was healing, but Veer could feel the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. Every time he touched the Kairu, the whispers returned, louder, more insistent. The temptation to use its power for good, or for his own benefit, was overwhelming. One night, after a long day of meetings, Veer retired to his chamber. He stood before the mirror, staring at the gem hanging around his neck. Its eerie glow seemed to pulse with life, as if calling to him. You've come so far, Veer, the gem whispered. You could have it all. Power, strength, dominion over this kingdom. Veer closed his eyes, his fingers brushing the cold surface of the gem. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Don't listen, Kavi's voice broke through his thoughts. They had entered silently, standing behind him. You are not defined by this gem. You are defined by your choices, your actions. Veer turned to face them, his gaze softening. He knew Kavi was right. The temptation would always be there, but it was his heart, his mind, that would ultimately shape his future. "I won't let it consume me," Veer vowed. "I won't let it." In the weeks that followed Kale's defeat, Veer continued his campaign to stabilize the kingdom. The eastern provinces were slowly recovering, but the wounds left by war were deep, and the people's trust in their king had to be earned. Each day brought new challenges, disputes between rival factions, hunger and poverty among the common folk, and whispers of rebellion brewing in the shadows. But the most dangerous challenge Veer faced was the one inside himself, the constant pull of the Koiru. Every time he placed the gem in its resting place, nestled beneath his armor, he could feel its influence tugging at his soul, urging him to wield its power for more than just survival. The voices were quiet but insistent, telling him that he could reshape the kingdom, destroy his enemies, and rule without question. But Veer had vowed not to let it consume him. He had seen what it did to Kale, how it twisted his mind, how it turned him into something less than human. Veer knew that the path of power was dangerous, and he had already lost so much. He wasn't willing to sacrifice everything to the gem. One evening, as Veer stood at the edge of the palace balcony overlooking the city, Kavi approached quietly, sensing his unease. "Your Majesty," Kavi said softly, her eyes scanning the darkening horizon. "You've been distant. More so than usual." Veer turned to face her, his expression pained. "I feel as though the weight of the kingdom is crushing me. The Koiru pulls at me, and every decision I make feels like it's a step closer to something darker." Kavi stepped closer, their presence a grounding force. "You're not alone in this, Veer. I'm here. And your people are with you. It's easy to feel lost when the power around you is so overwhelming, but you have something Kale never had. You have a heart that still believes in what's right." Veer met her gaze, the burden in his chest easing slightly. "I don't know if I can resist it forever, Kavi. The temptation, it's constant." Kavi's voice was steady and firm. "You can. The Koiru doesn't define you. Your choices do." Though Veer found solace in Kavi's words, the kingdom was far from peaceful. Tensions between various factions continued to simmer, and a new, more subtle threat began to emerge. It started with whispers, rumors of a dark figure who had been seen moving in the shadows, someone who knew of the Koiru and sought its power for their own purposes. A figure known only as Shyam, a name spoken in fear by those who had encountered him. He was a shadowy figure with connections to ancient magic and forgotten deities, someone who had long sought the Koiru and knew how to wield its power. Unlike Kale, who had been driven by brute force, Shyam was clever, manipulative, and patient. And he knew Veer was the key to unlocking the full potential of the gem. The first sign that something was amiss came when a trusted advisor to Veer, Rajendra, was found dead, an apparent suicide, though the circumstances were suspicious. Rajendra had been a loyal supporter of Veer's rule, and his sudden death sent shockwaves through the court. It was the first in a series of similar deaths, all seemingly connected to a growing web of intrigue surrounding Veer's reign. Kavi was the first to recognize the pattern. She had been investigating the deaths, a sharp mind piecing together the fragments of the puzzle. One evening, she approached Veer with her findings. "I've traced the deaths back to a series of hidden factions. Some are old enemies, but others, they are far more dangerous," Kavi said, her eyes scanning the documents she had gathered. "There's a force operating in the shadows. They want a Koiru, and they are willing to kill anyone who gets in their way." Veer's heart sank. "Do you think it's Shyam? The one who's been whispering of the gem?" Kavi nodded grimly. "I believe so. He's no fool. He knows the power of the Koiru better than anyone. And he knows you are the only one standing between him and it." Veer clenched his fists, his thoughts racing. He couldn't let this happen, not now. Not after everything he had fought for. "We need to find him," Veer said, determination settling over him like a cloak. "I won't let anyone take what's mine, what's rightfully the kingdom's." The search for Shyam took Veer and Kavi across the kingdom. They followed a trail of whispers and rumors, traveling through hidden paths and forgotten towns, each step bringing them closer to the elusive figure. Along the way, Veer could feel the weight of the Koiru pressing heavier against him, as if the gem was aware of their pursuit. He could sense that Shyam was always just one step ahead. One night, as they camped by the side of a quiet river, Veer stood staring into the water, the flickering firelight casting long shadows across the landscape. He could feel the cool breeze on his skin, but it did little to quell the fire burning inside him. He needed to end this. Kavi joined him by the riverbank, her expression softening as she looked at him. "We'll find him, Veer. And when we do, we'll put an end to this once and for all." Veer turned to her, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "What if I can't resist the Kairu? What if I use its power, like Kale did?" Kavi took a deep breath, her voice gentle but firm. "You won't. You've already proven that you're stronger than that. Power is only dangerous when you let it control you. You have the strength to control it." For a moment, Veer simply looked at her, his gaze filled with gratitude. "I'm lucky to have you by my side, Kavi. I don't know what I would do without you." Kavi smiled, though there was sadness in her eyes. "You'll never have to find out, Veer. We'll face this together." The next day, they were ambushed. Shyam had known they were getting close, and his agents were waiting in the shadows. The fight was swift and brutal, with Veer and Kavi fending off the attackers as best as they could. But the real shock came when Shyam himself appeared, standing on a nearby cliff, watching them with a cold, calculating gaze. "You've come far, King Veer," Shyam's voice echoed, carrying across the battlefield. "But this is where your journey ends. The Kairu is mine." Veer's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at Shyam. There was no escape now. The final confrontation had arrived. The air between Veer and Shyam crackled with tension as they faced each other on the battlefield. Kavi was by his side, but Veer knew this battle was his alone. He had to face Shyam, not just for the throne, but for the very soul of the kingdom. "You think you can control the Kairu?" Veer called out, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "You think you can use its power for your own gain?" Shyam laughed darkly. "You misunderstand, Veer. The gem isn't a tool to be wielded. It's a force of nature, a destiny waiting to be claimed. I've waited my entire life for this moment." The ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble as the Kairu pulsed in its holder around Veer's neck. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, urging him to unleash its full power. He could feel the heat building in his chest, could feel its weight trying to consume him. But he refused to let it. "Not now. I will not be your pawn," Veer said, his voice fierce. "I am the king of Udiga, and I choose my own fate." With that, he stepped forward, his sword drawn, his eyes locked on Shyam. The battle for the Kairu, and for the future of the kingdom, had begun in earnest. The moment was charged with raw energy, the air itself trembling as Veer and Shyam faced off on the battlefield. The whispers of the Kairu were now deafening in Veer's mind, urging him to give in, to wield the power that was his birthright. The gem pulsed against his chest, its light flickering like a firestorm, promising victory, dominance, and the destruction of anyone who stood in his way. But Veer fought it. He had fought it before, and he would fight it again. His kingdom, his people, were worth more than power. Kavi was beside him, steady, unwavering, her presence grounding him in the face of the chaos. Shyam smirked, his eyes glowing with dark anticipation. "You don't understand, Veer. The Kairu was never meant to be resisted. You'll see. Once you embrace its power, you will understand your true potential." Veer's grip tightened around his sword. "I don't need your twisted version of power. I don't need to control everyone. I need to protect my kingdom." With a roar, Shyam surged forward, his dark energy surging with him. Veer met him head-on, their swords clashing with a deafening sound that echoed across the field. The force of the impact sent shockwaves through the air, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Each strike from Shyam was filled with the raw power of the gem, but Veer's heart remained steady, his will unyielding. He could feel the Kairu pushing him, urging him to unleash everything he had, but he resisted. The power it offered was tempting, yes, but Veer knew that it would only consume him in the end. The battle raged on, the two warriors locked in a deadly dance of blades and dark energy. Kavi moved alongside Veer, her presence a quiet strength as they both fought against the tide of darkness that Shyam wielded. But Shyam was relentless, and his magic was powerful. With each swing of his blade, Veer could feel his strength waning. His body was growing tired, and the pull of the Kairu was becoming more difficult to resist. "You're fading, Veer," Shyam taunted, his voice a low growl. "You cannot fight what is inevitable. The gem was meant for me. It will always be mine." Veer's vision blurred, his limbs aching with exhaustion, but he refused to give in. His people needed him. Kavi believed in him. And he believed in himself. With a final, desperate rallying cry, Veer summoned every last ounce of strength within him. He fought through the pain, through the overwhelming desire to give in to the power of the gem. With one last, powerful strike, he brought his blade down on Shyam, cutting through his defenses and sending the dark figure sprawling to the ground. Shyam gasped, his hand reaching out for the Kairu as if it could save him. But Veer was faster. With a decisive motion, he tore the gem from his neck and crushed it in his hand, the shards of the Kairu scattering across the battlefield like pieces of a shattered dream. As the final blow fell, Shyam let out a blood-curdling scream. The dark energy that had consumed him began to dissipate, leaving nothing but the remains of a broken man. The Kairu, once a source of immense power, was now destroyed, its magic gone. Veer stood over the fallen figure, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his sword still raised. His hands trembled from the exertion, his chest heavy with the weight of everything he had just overcome. He had defeated Shyam, but the cost was more than he could bear. Kavi rushed to his side, her eyes wide with concern. "Veer, you did it. You defeated him." Veer nodded, his voice hoarse. "But at what cost, Kavi? The Kairu was a part of me, it was a part of this kingdom. What happens now?" Kavi placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze unwavering. "Now, we rebuild. The Kairu was never meant to rule over us. It was a tool, not a destiny. You, Veer, are the true king of this land. And you don't need a gem to prove it." Veer looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude and something else, hope. He had faced the darkness within himself, and he had come through it. It wasn't the gem that had made him strong, it was his will, his heart, and the love and loyalty of those who stood by him. The battle was over. The war was won. In the aftermath of the battle, the kingdom slowly began to heal. The people of Udiga rejoiced in the defeat of Shyam, and the streets were filled with celebrations. The warlord who had once threatened their way of life was no more, and peace was finally within reach. But Veer's mind remained troubled. The destruction of the Kairu had not been the end of his struggle. He still had to rebuild the kingdom, restore trust, and heal the wounds that had been caused by the long years of conflict. The weight of leadership was never light, and Veer knew that his journey was far from over. Yet, as he stood atop the palace steps, looking out over his people, he felt a flicker of something he had long thought lost, hope. He had won the battle, not through power, but through the strength of his own heart. Kavi stood beside him, their presence a constant reminder of the bond they shared, the strength they drew from each other. Veer turned to her, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "We did it," he said quietly. "We did," Kavi replied, her eyes sparkling with something more than pride, something deeper, something unspoken. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Veer felt ready to face it. His journey had been long and fraught with danger, but it had led him to this moment, a new beginning, a new dawn. And as the sun rose over Udiga, its golden light spilling across the land, Veer knew that this was just the beginning of his reign. The Kairu may have been destroyed, but his heart, his will, and his kingdom were stronger than ever. Years passed, and Veer's reign was marked by peace and prosperity. Under his leadership, Udiga flourished, and the scars of war slowly faded. He and Kavi ruled side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Though the Kairu had been destroyed, its legacy lived on in the kingdom, a reminder that true power did not come from a gem or a relic, but from the strength of one's convictions. Veer had proven that a ruler could rise from the ashes of conflict, not through the pursuit of power, but through the love and loyalty of those who stood beside him. And as he looked out over his kingdom, he knew that his story would inspire generations to come, a tale of betrayal, of love, of retribution, and of a king who chose to forge his own destiny. The future was his to shape. Years had passed since the fall of Shyam and the destruction of the Kairu, yet the echoes of the past continued to shape Veer's reign. Udiga had flourished, and peace had returned to the land, but leadership was never without its burdens. Despite the success, Veer could not shake the feeling of isolation that sometimes crept upon him in the quietest moments. He had won his kingdom, but had he won himself? Kavi, now his queen, stood at his side, a constant pillar of strength, yet Veer knew that the crown was never meant to be worn alone. Their relationship had deepened over the years, but there was always the question of what the future held for them both. One afternoon, Veer found himself standing alone in the royal gardens, watching the vibrant colors of the sunset paint the sky. The wind carried the scent of jasmine and wildflowers, but even that could not ease the heaviness in his heart. It was in these moments of solitude that the memories of the Kairu, and its terrible pull, returned. He had destroyed the gem, but had he truly rid himself of its influence? Or had he simply sealed away its darkness, waiting for the right moment to return? Veer, Kavi's voice broke through his thoughts, steady and comforting. She approached, her hand reaching for his. "You're thinking of the Kairu again, aren't you?" He turned to her, his gaze weary. "I can still feel its weight sometimes. A pull, deep within my chest. I wonder if I made the right choice, Kavi." Kavi smiled softly, the warmth of her expression reassuring. "You did. You didn't let it control you. You are the king, not the gem. And you've proven that time and time again." Her words were like a balm, easing the storm inside him. But deep within, Veer couldn't help but wonder, what if the power he had destroyed was something that could have changed the world? And what if there were other forces, hidden in the corners of his kingdom, that were waiting for an opportunity to challenge his rule? Veer's concerns were not unfounded. Despite the peace he had secured, rumors of unrest had begun to surface in distant provinces. There were whispers of a new faction forming in the Eastern Territories, secretive, shrouded in darkness, and led by individuals who claimed to possess knowledge of the ancient powers that had once threatened the kingdom. One such figure had emerged, Vijay, a charismatic leader with a mysterious past, who claimed to have inherited the legacy of the Kairu. The rumors were subtle at first, mere whispers in taverns and marketplaces, but as Veer investigated further, he began to realize the depth of the threat that lay beneath the surface. Kavi, ever by his side, was the first to warn him. "Veer, there are those who will never stop seeking the power you destroyed. They will try to revive the Kairu or find new sources of strength. They will come for you." Veer's heart tightened. He had hoped that with the fall of Shyam, the threat had ended. But now, the shadows of the past were returning, stronger than before. "We must act swiftly," Veer said, determination in his voice. "If Vijay and his followers are truly after the power of the gem, we cannot allow them to succeed." Kavi nodded. "We'll gather our allies, strengthen the defenses, and ensure the provinces remain loyal. But this will be a different battle, Veer. Not one of swords, but one of hearts and minds." In the months that followed, Veer's kingdom was plunged into a quiet but intense struggle. The forces loyal to Vijay grew in strength, fueled by promises of power, revenge, and the resurrection of the Kairu. News of this movement spread like wildfire, and soon, entire towns were swept up in the fervor of the new rebellion. As the unrest spread, Veer found himself forced into action. He sent emissaries to the provinces, gathering intelligence and attempting to cut off the rebellion at its roots. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized the true scale of the threat. Vijay had found a way to harness the power of the Kairu, not through the gem itself, but by unlocking ancient magic tied to its essence. In his search, Veer learned that Vijay had located an artifact, long forgotten by history, a relic that, when combined with the shattered pieces of the Kairu, would resurrect its power. The Kairu had not truly died. It had only been buried, waiting for someone with enough knowledge to bring it back to life. Veer's heart sank as he realized the truth. The danger was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. He turned to Kavi, his voice low. "We've underestimated this. Vijay has found a way to bring back the power of the Kairu, and he's not the only one who wants it." Kavi's eyes flashed with concern. "We can't let this happen, Veer. We have to stop him, before he has the chance to use the power for his own gain. Veer nodded grimly. Then we will fight, once again. We will fight for the kingdom, for the future, and for the memory of the Koiru. This time, we will make sure that its legacy is buried for good. The battle for the soul of Udiga reached its peak as the rebellion led by Vijay grew bolder. Provinces fell under his control, one by one, and soon, the kingdom was divided. The people were torn between their loyalty to their king and the promise of untold power offered by Vijay. In the final days before the inevitable clash, Veer summoned his allies, those who had stood with him against Shyam, to the palace. Together, they devised a plan to end the rebellion once and for all. We must strike at the heart of Vijay's forces, Veer said, his voice unwavering. If we can destroy the artifact he's using to resurrect the Koiru, we can end this before it escalates further. Kavi, ever the strategist, nodded. We'll need to move quickly. If Vijay succeeds in harnessing the power of the Koiru, he will become unstoppable. The final battle loomed on the horizon, and with it, the promise of either salvation or destruction. Veer knew that the future of Udiga, and the legacy of the Koiru, would be decided in the coming days. As the armies clashed, the air was thick with the sound of metal against metal, the cries of soldiers, and the promise of a kingdom on the brink of collapse. Veer fought with all his strength, his sword flashing in the sunlight as he led his troops into battle. But even as victory seemed within reach, the cost was painfully clear. The battle raged for hours, the forces of Vijay proving to be fierce and relentless. Yet, despite the odds, Veer and his allies broke through. Kavi fought by his side, their bond unbreakable as they carved a path through the enemy lines. At the heart of the battlefield, Veer confronted Vijay, who stood surrounded by the remains of the Koiru's essence. The relic glowed with dark power, its magic pulsing in the air. You can't stop me, Veer, Vijay sneered, his eyes burning with the hunger for power. The Koiru will rise again. You can't destroy what's already been awakened. Veer's heart pounded as he raised his sword. This kingdom doesn't need the Koiru to be strong. It needs its people. With a single, decisive strike, Veer shattered the relic, the magic dissipating like smoke in the wind. The final victory came at a steep price, but the kingdom was saved. The darkness of the Koiru was gone, and the people of Udiga could finally breathe freely once more. With the rebellion crushed and the power of the Koiru eradicated, peace once again settled over Udiga. The kingdom was rebuilt, not just in structure, but in spirit. Veer ruled justly, guided by the lessons he had learned, the dangers of unchecked power, the strength of his people, and the importance of love and loyalty. Kavi remained at his side, their bond stronger than ever. Together, they shaped a new future for Udiga, one built on unity, hope, and the promise that no dark power would ever rise again. And as Veer stood before his people, watching the sunset paint the sky once more, he knew that his journey, his true legacy, had only just begun. The dust of battle had settled, and Udiga was healing. The streets were filled with the hum of everyday life once more, children laughing in the marketplaces, merchants peddling their wares, and soldiers returning home, their faces weary but hopeful. Peace had been hard won, and Veer knew that maintaining it would be no less challenging than the wars he had fought. The first few weeks after the battle were filled with ceremonies and speeches, declarations of victory, and the rebuilding of broken alliances. Yet, despite the outward calm, Veer felt a growing unease in his heart. The people looked to him for leadership, but as much as he wanted to offer them a bright future, the weight of his responsibilities pressed heavily on him. At night, when the palace grew quiet, Veer would often wander the halls, lost in thought. Kavi, ever perceptive, would join him, her presence a silent reminder that he was not alone. Veer, she would say softly, you've done more than anyone could have asked. Udiga is safe because of you. The kingdom is flourishing, and so are we. But even her comforting words couldn't fully ease the turmoil within him. The power of the Koiru, once so alluring, had left an indelible mark on him. The temptation to seize it again, to claim the strength it offered, still whispered in the back of his mind, though he knew the consequences would be dire. While peace reigned in Udiga, not all were content with the new order. Rumors of dissatisfaction began to circulate among the nobility, particularly those who had lost influence during the upheavals of the past. The destruction of the Kairu had removed a symbol of power, and some factions longed for its return. One such faction was led by Rajiv, a former court advisor who had been banished after his involvement in Shyam's rebellion. Though he had been silent since the final battle, it soon became clear that his ambitions had not waned. He had begun to secretly gather supporters, appealing to those who believed that Veer's reign had been built on the ashes of the Kairu's power. Veer was made aware of this threat when an emissary arrived at the palace, bearing a letter with an unmistakable seal. Rajiv had returned, and he was calling for a council of the old nobles to reclaim their place in Udiga's future. "Do you think it's true?" Kavi asked, concern clouding her features. Veer's face grew hard. "It doesn't matter. Rajiv and those who follow him will not tear this kingdom apart. We've fought too hard for peace." But even as he spoke, gnawing fear took root in his heart. Rajiv was a clever man, and his words could sway the discontented. The kingdom was fragile, and Veer had learned long ago that power, once attained, was always at risk of being lost. In the dead of night, when the moon hung high above Udiga like a cold eye, Veer received word of an attack. Rajiv's forces, small but lethal, had struck a nearby outpost, taking control of vital resources that Veer's government had spent years securing. Kavi was at his side immediately, her gaze unwavering. "We cannot let him take more. We need to act before it spreads." Veer clenched his fists. The rebellion, though not on the same scale as before, was still a threat that would test everything he had fought for. He gathered his most trusted commanders and prepared for war, but this time, it wasn't the Kairu that would decide the outcome. It was his ability to unify the kingdom, to inspire loyalty, and to show that even without the dark power of the gem, he was still their rightful ruler. In the days that followed, the battle lines were drawn. Veer's army clashed with Rajiv's forces, but the fight was not just one of swords and shields. It was a battle of ideals, of two visions for Udiga's future. Veer knew that this fight, like the one against Shyam, would not end with the swing of a blade. It would end with the hearts of the people. And that, more than anything, would determine his fate. The war dragged on for months. Rajiv's forces, though not as numerous, were cunning and persistent. They attacked in the shadows, gathering strength where Veer's influence was weakest. But Veer, with Kavi at his side, refused to retreat. His strategy was clear: win the people, and the kingdom would follow. Veer spent more time in the villages, in the marketplaces, and among the farmers, speaking directly to the people who would decide the future of Udiga. He told them that the battle was not just about power, it was about freedom, about ensuring that no one, not even him, could control their lives with the lure of forbidden magic. Kavi, too, played her part, rallying the women of Udiga, organizing supply lines, and ensuring that the morale of the soldiers remained high. "Remember," Kavi would say, her voice firm, "we are fighting for the soul of this kingdom. We are fighting for each other." Slowly, Veer began to see the results of his efforts. More and more people came to his side, not because of his title or his past victories, but because they believed in the future he was trying to build. Udiga was more than just a kingdom, it was a symbol of hope for all who had suffered under tyranny, for all who wanted a life without the shadow of dark power hanging over them. The final confrontation came in the heart of Udiga, where Veer faced Rajiv in a battle that would determine the future of the kingdom. It was a fight not just for control, but for the very essence of what Udiga stood for: freedom from tyranny, the rule of the people, and a kingdom built on trust and unity. Rajiv was as ruthless as ever, his hunger for power blinding him to the needs of the people. "You are nothing, Veer," he spat, his eyes dark with malice. "You are just a puppet, a pawn in the game. You cannot hold back what is destined to come." Veer stood tall, his sword in hand, his resolve unbroken. "I am not your pawn, Rajiv," he said firmly. "I am the king of Udiga, and this kingdom will never fall to the likes of you." The battle was fierce, but it was clear that Veer was not the same young man who had first faced the Kairu. He had been tested by darkness, by betrayal, by war, and he had emerged stronger. In the end, it was not just steel that defeated Rajiv, but the strength of the people. As Veer's forces closed in on him, Rajiv realized too late that his vision for Udiga was built on lies, while Veer's vision had been built on love and unity. With a final, decisive blow, Veer struck down Rajiv, ending the rebellion once and for all. The kingdom of Udiga emerged from the ashes of war stronger than ever. Veer, now more than just a king, was a symbol of resilience, of the power of unity, and of the strength that could come from letting go of the temptations of dark power. The Kairu had been destroyed, but the lesson it taught Veer, the true cost of power and the importance of ruling with compassion, would stay with him forever. And as Veer and Kavi stood side by side, watching their kingdom flourish, they knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. For Udiga had been reborn, not through the magic of a gem, but through the hearts of those who believed in a brighter tomorrow.